everybody. Mike here. Welcome to the Vox Podcast. So glad that you're tuning in. Thank you so very much for allowing us to be a small part of your life. Last fall, interviewed a guy named Nate Collins, and so it was several episodes ago, who was the founder of something called Revoice. And Revoice was a conference that was also kind of emblematic of a bigger movement of people who identified as gay and people who were committed to following the kind of traditional classic understanding of biblical teaching around sexuality. And we interviewed Nate, a guy named David Bennett, who had come out with a book called A War of Loves, and then a friend named Tyler Chernitzky, who is a pastor. There is this growing sort of movement represented by this Revoice conference that I find really, really fascinating. And so there's another Revoice conference coming up. I'm recording this in April 2019. The conference this year is let's see here. It is June 5th through 8th. 2019 in St. Louis, called Revoice 19. If you go to revoice.us or .us, you can find out more about it. And I've gotten some questions from folks on both sides of the LGBTQ conversation about why it is that we are highlighting these stories so consistently. And those are very fair questions. My answer is, first of all, I'm always interested in people and who are trying to find kind of a middle ground between the polarities. And so we have very non-affirming Christians, we have very affirming Christians, and here are Christians that kind of are falling in the middle so that they get criticized from both sides. They identify as gay, so they get criticized from the conservative side, and yet they hold to the traditional understanding of Christian sexual ethics, so they get criticized a bit from the progressive side, because they make the argument, and this is where Johanna, the gal we're going to meet today, they make the argument that following the teachings of Jesus is not harmful for gay people. And one of I think the biggest arguments for the, affirming community is that, well, I mean, what you're saying, if you want to follow Jesus, is you're committed to a life of celibacy and the false promise of orientation change. And so here's this whole group of people who are arguing, we are gay, and we've tried to change that, and orientation change isn't the goal of our salvation. Christ-likeness, and Christ-likeness is. And yet, in the midst of the processing through all of these issues, we've decided to commit to, celibacy, or however it is that the traditional ethic is upheld. And so I find this interesting. Now, when I was watching the Revoice YouTube channel, there was a talk that was given last year by a woman named Johanna Finnegan. She has an undergraduate degree from Princeton, a PhD in philosophy from MIT, and she gave a talk on responding to particularly conservative critics. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and so I wanted to have her on. And so this is a very long episode, I know, and there are two parts to it. The first is just kind of her story, which I found totally compelling, and then the second is some of the content that she explores more fully in the YouTube talk, but we get into a bit of it here. And again, I'm trying to highlight part of this whole conversation that isn't normally highlighted. And if you're curious, go to revoice.us or go to their conference, which is second year, and I think it's going to be much bigger this year. So anyway, all that is to say, I'm not an advocate for them. I'm not, paid by them or anything like that. But I find the conversation they're having deeply, deeply interesting, and so I hope you enjoy this one. Hey guys, Mike here. I'm here with my new friend, Johanna Finnegan, right? Is how you say that? Mm-hmm. Not the Joanna part, but the Finnegan part. and this is a sister from another mister. She lives in Ohio. So let me hear you. Did you grow up in Ohio?
No, sorry.
Oh.
Sorry.
Did your husband grow up in Ohio?
No.
Oh boy.
We're here for the Air Force Base is why we're here.
Okay, so you're not here by choice is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, in the sense you could work somewhere else, but yeah, we didn't. Ohio. Sorry, I don't want this to come out the wrong way.
It's okay. It's okay. Let me just yeah. So the Ohio State Buckeye sign over my shoulder isn't super impressive to you right now.
It doesn't speak to me one way or the other.
Are you a sports fan?
No, I used to be much more of a Patriots fan than I am now. I would say I'm still a little bit of a fan, or identified as such. But yeah, I found recently that I've had just a lot of other things that I want to do with my time. No, seriously. And particularly my husband gets really emotionally invested, and so he really gets so worked up, and it's sort of ridiculous because it's the Patriots, because it should be like the easiest team to watch and follow.
Right.
Like, if they're not up by 2 touchdowns, he's like tearing his hair out. He's like, they're gonna blow it. They're gonna blow it. They're gonna lose it all. And so the drama of that, sort of makes, I can only take so much of that in my life. So I enjoy, he introduced me to football while we were living in Boston together. So that's how I became a Patriots fan. Got it.
Where did you grow up originally?
Upstate New York.
Upstate New York. And then parents were religious?
No,
Ooh.
not particularly. I would say we were Christian in the sense that we weren't Jewish.
Okay.
When I was little, we sometimes attended a Catholic church every now and then. In sort of my older elementary years, middle school years, we sporadically attended sort of a mainline Presbyterian PCUSA church. But I didn't see any of that religious attendance translating into anything meaningful.
Yeah.
It just sort of seemed like, something that, back in those days, so we're talking 80s, right? Like, it was still sort of, I think, culturally appropriate to go to church, even if you weren't really into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
what was the, I'm sorry to interrupt you if you were heading somewhere else.
Oh, no. Yeah, just going to say that, it struck me that nobody took any of it seriously, even as a kid. It struck me very keenly. I was like, wait, we're singing these songs, we're reciting these creeds, on Sunday, we're praying these prayers, when we show up to church. But none of this means anything. It's like a kind of play acting. It's like a kind of, like a civil war, like a historical reenactment, like let's pretend we believe in Jesus for an hour a week. And that's all I knew. That's what I thought Christianity was. And as a result, it seemed kind of like a terrible waste of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's just the lens I was viewing it through, my particular experience, and I'm sure I had a child's eyes and was missing all kinds of things. So I don't mean this as an insult against, mainline or progressive Christianity in general, but for me, there was no connection there.
Right.
How about that?
Yeah. So when your parents would go, was there any spiritual conversations or anything at home? Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I got in trouble once for saying that God didn't exist, but, I don't think God, I think I was probably like 12 and I'm like, I don't think God's real. And that was a bad thing to say. And said, no, you don't say that. But that was it. That was all they had to say about that. And it didn't impress me, as someone who is sort of philosophically oriented and a deep thinker, the idea that we say these things and we go through these motions. But we don't really believe it. We don't really take it seriously. It doesn't really impact our lives, but we don't like to think about that. We don't like to acknowledge that.
Right.
That is totally rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that. What were the messages as you were growing up then that you received about sexuality? Were those from the church?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Or that was just cultural?
Yes. Yeah, cultural. So I was aware, that religious Catholics somewhere out there thought homosexuality was a sin. I was aware that evangelicals, this mystical tribe of people that I'd never met, never seen one in my life. But, I knew from reading the newspapers and the magazines that they were somewhere out there and they, hated gay people is, how I would have perceived it at the time. So I knew that there were Christians of some sort that had a problem with sexuality, but that wasn't my experience. I did grow up with very negative views about it. When I realized, when I kind of really couldn't deny to myself any longer that I was gay, which probably happened around 11 or so. Wow. Well, yeah. And it was, even earlier than that, I started to feel, weird things. And I think for a while I tried to tell myself, oh no, I'm just really intensely into friendship and not terribly interested in boys. But eventually, as hormones sort of ratchet up, I was like, no, that's not really what's going on. I feel the way about the girls, the way that the girls are feeling about the boys, and vice versa. And that's what's happening here. And I was not happy about that. I didn't tell anybody for 4 years, at least, 3 or 4 years. It was a playground insult. I'd heard the words gay and lesbian, but for the longest time I didn't know that actually applied to real people. I just thought it was a term of abuse.
Yeah.
And then when I did find out that there was a such thing as gay people, they're already described in just sort of terms of contempt, scorn. You got to watch out for them. They're going to try to, whatever, touch you, do something to you, Yep.
AIDS was happening in the 80s, the first AIDS crisis.
There was the AIDS thing, which I think on some level I was conscious of, and that was a gay thing. But just being gay was not a good thing to be. There
weren't religious messages behind that. That was just what you'd internalized along the way.
Yeah. So all of my peers were very secular, but I got bullied a lot in middle school, and I got bullied for different reasons, but the bullying that hurt the worst was on account of my sexuality, because that's where I felt, sort of the most vulnerable.
Oh, of course.
That was somebody, picks on you for being a nerd, you can still be like, well, yeah, but we'll see who's laughing, 20 years from now.
Yeah, exactly.
But when people would, go after me for being gay, like A, I was like, oh no, they're right. And B, I was like, oh, I'm this terrible thing.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't have a positive example. I am this scary thing. I am this monster. When I saw Beauty and the Beast, I was like, that just hit me. And I was like, oh no, I'm this beast. I'm this, and that's a hard thing to be, like a teenage, a young teenage kid and be wrestled with and not be able to talk about.
No.
So none of that was religious, really.
Oh my goodness. And did your parents, looking back on it, did your parents have any idea that you were going through this?
A level on which, so I was very tomboyish. I was, getting mistaken for a boy all the time. Whenever I played Barbies with my friends, I was always Ken, and whenever we played house, I was always the daddy, because I was so good at it, is what the way they would put it.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. I was sort of set up to fail. But so, and, there were times when my mom would be like, oh, do you need to, you kind of look like a dyke, do you really need to wear that shirt?
Oh, wow.
Do you really need to walk like that? But I don't know it's so much that she expected that, but she feared that might be a thing. I think they were both in the place where I don't think they knew I was before I did, but I definitely know that at least the possibility of being mistaken as such crossed their mind, if that makes any sense.
It absolutely makes sense. So that's just another reinforcing message to you,
right,
as you're trying to figure all of this out.
Yeah.
So you hit college.
Yes.
You're going to Princeton.
I am going to Princeton. I was going to Princeton.
Yes, and so obviously great student.
Mm-hmm.
As you transitioned into college, had you let your parents in on any of this yet?
Yeah. I'd actually come out to my mom around 14 or 15. She was the first person I came out to.
Oh wow.
Yeah, she didn't reject me. Well, I needed to tell somebody. I'm not a faker. I'm not a pretender. And I'd kept this to myself for years. So I told her. She didn't reject me. She didn't throw me out, but she clearly wasn't thrilled. She was ashamed, a little bit horrified. You can't make a decision like that. So it wasn't a positive experience, but it wasn't like getting kicked out of my house or anything.
Remind me again how old you were when you told her?
When I was talking to my mom, or
when you were 15.
14 or 15.
Okay.
14.
Okay. And then how long till your dad?
Actually, I didn't tell my dad till after I got to college.
Okay.
Because my mom was like, "Oh, don't tell your dad. Who knows how? I don't know how he'll react. He might disown you."
Oh boy.
Well, it wasn't, and I don't think he would have. But it was, again, if it's something you can't talk about,
exactly.
Nobody knows. If all you know is that everyone has really negative feelings about this,
that's right.
If it's unspeakable, then we don't know. So I don't fault her for thinking that. It actually, I wasn't sure. As it turned out, that wasn't the case. When he found out, so during my freshman year, he found out, and his reaction was to cry, sob. So he certainly wasn't thrilled, but rejection was not part of it. Disowning was not part of it. So.
Yeah. So you find yourself at Princeton.
I'm in Princeton.
And religiously, where are you at during the college years?
Yeah, so I start out pretty, based on my previous sexuality experience and my experience of sort of mainline Christianity growing up, I'm starting out as a pretty hardened atheist.
Yeah. That 12-year-old who didn't see God as real has now hardened into that. Yeah. But providentially, I think I started off college with high hopes. In high school, I didn't know any other lesbians. I didn't know any other gay people. I didn't know anybody who actually thought homosexuality was okay. And so I had all these visions for, I'm going to get to college, I'm going to be totally out. I'm going to be free. I'm going to be able to connect with my own people, and, it's going to be great. Right. It's going to fix my life. I'd had struggles with depression and other issues before. But I'd always kept my eye on, as I think a lot of kids do, right? Getting out from under my parents' roof, getting free, being on my own, being liberated. And that was going to fix everything. It felt nice. It felt nice that to be out, to be open, to be romantically alive, able to flirt and date like everybody else. But I discovered really quickly that, even though I was in a new place and there was good stuff going on, I had a lot of personal baggage and mental health issues that freedom and women, dating women were not going to solve. This wasn't going to be a cure-all. There were just a lot of ways in which I was a mess, and there was family stress in there, and like I said, different issues, and we don't need to dig all that up. Yeah.
Long story short is I withdraw my freshman year temporarily because I've just become so deeply depressed,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all right. I mean, it's all right. I mean, God, we're going to find out that God uses it. So that's all good.
I know, but it still blows chunks.
No, it's a time that was, it was devastating,
I can't imagine.
particularly because I'd had these hopes
Yeah.
that this was, once I could really be myself, it was all going to fall into place. And like, no, wow, it's actually more complicated than that. So I am home for a while, a few months, and I'm out of school, and I've been questioning a lot of things about life, and I have a lot of spare time on my hands. And in that first semester I'd been at college, I'd gotten exposed to two things, evangelicals and the internet.
There's a winning combo.
Wait. So I'd never known an evangelical growing up. Through following gay rights issues, I knew that there were these people out there and they had a big problem with gays. And that was the only thing I knew about them. I had no idea what they believed about Jesus. I had no idea what the gospel was or anything like that. I only became acquainted with the gospel on any level when I saw my first semester at Princeton. There was a Campus Crusade for Christ ad in the college newspaper with the 4 spiritual laws in it. And it was like, and it wasn't like I was like persuaded or converted. I was like, oh, but it was very much a moment like, oh, that's interesting. That's what they believe. And so it actually, the internet, I found out that as today, it was the same 20 years ago, there are a lot of wrong people on the internet. And I also really like to argue. So I decided that I would spend all this time going to like family values websites, organization websites that, had their own like web forums and bulletin boards and stuff. And I was just going to get into it with the Christian. Here I'm a 18, 19-year-old kid who's, infatuated with her own intelligence. So, this is a
of course,
completely reasonable thing to do. I met a lot of jerks. I'll be honest, most of the Christians I met that way, a lot of them were jerks. But there were some people who, I wouldn't say they bowled me over intellectually, or I felt they answered my arguments. But it was startling to me to meet people for the first time who seemed to be, what I'd been missing, who seemed to be taking Christianity seriously. Like what I'd been missing in the Christianity of my youth that I thought was impossible, right? That nobody thinks this stuff actually matters, that nobody thinks this is actually real. Some of these people, regardless of how disastrous their politics were, Jesus mattered to them. What they thought God wanted made a difference for how they lived their lives, and how their choices they made. And that was mind blowing to realize that this could matter, that this could be serious, that this could be an integral part of like an integral faith, not just something you dress up as. So eventually through this, I got connected to a dialogue project. I think it might be the first dialogue project on this subject. It was called Bridges Across the Divide. And it was supposed to bring together people who disagree about homosexuality. As it happened, almost everybody on both sides was either gay or same-sex attracted.
Wow.
So we had on the conservative side at the time, we had lots of ex-gays. And on the affirming side, we had, both secular atheists like myself and as well as some progressive Christians, stuff like that. This is sort of where I form two relationships that sort of change things for me, or sort of the next step. One of the women I met on the traditional side, I think she identified as ex-gay. She was just a little bit older than me. Just very passionate. I think she was very charismatic, sort of, Toronto blessing-y, very dynamic. And also just this relentless, tenacious evangelist that, would not shut up about Jesus and would not stop talking to me about Jesus. And at one point she sends me Philip Yancey's Disappointment with God. And I write back to her, I said, honey, I'm not disappointed with God. I don't think he exists. I don't think he's real. And she's like, no, just read the book anyway. And it was actually hugely influential. And it's not so much the apologetic involved, but the way that Yancey proceeds in that book is just like, okay, we're disappointed with God, but let's look at the relationship between God and people from God's end. And he sort of does this by going through scripture, so God, how God relates to people in Genesis, how God relates to people in, Exodus, and, the wilderness and all that. And then through, David and Solomon, the prophets, and, of course, ultimately the person of Jesus. And he just paints this portrait of a God who's dynamic, right? Who loves, who hates because he loves, who cares, who gets upset, sometimes uses the language of a frustrated parent or, a jilted lover. And, I'd heard the sort of the trite expressions of personal relationship with God or personal God before, but I'd never understood what it meant, or, it always seemed empty to me. But when Philip Yancey, pointed to the scriptures and how the scriptures paint this picture of this narrative character of God as this really fascinating, loving, dynamic, interesting being, that has so much going on, I don't think it persuaded me that God exists, but it definitely got me to think, wow, it would be really interesting if he did exist.
And was like this.
Yeah, right. Like, wow, that's a kind of God that, wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that be interesting if there was a God who loved us like that?
Yeah.
And that, that just sort of, got the seeds planted.
So that was the one. No, that was one. So that was one relationship you met from this.
Yeah, the second relationship was she was a woman who's a bit older than me. I think she was probably in her either late 30s or early 40s at the time.
So very young. Now that we're looking back at it, very young person.
Right. But at the time, like
yeah, of course.
A totally different stage of life. But she and she was different. She was not pushy in any way, the way the first woman was. She was, but the first interesting thing about her was that she just had this unbelievably, gentle, kind, patient character that sort of she just had this magnetism about her that drew everyone else in the dialogue group towards her. Even like the most rabid, atheists, Christianity is evil, is harmful people would just be drawn to her. And it was, and I don't know how it was obvious or why it was obvious, but it was totally obvious that it was about Jesus, and it was about her passion for Jesus. And she never talked about it, or she never bragged about it, but just the way she lived her life, the way she spoke about her life, it just constantly reminded you of just how central Jesus was to her, and how important he was to her.
Wow.
And she was totally vulnerable and totally open about how she'd been same-sex attracted her whole life. And
that following Jesus hadn't changed that.
And, she'd been following Jesus the whole time. Following Jesus hadn't changed that. And, she'd been in a lot of, Pentecostal and charismatic circles where Jesus would be expected to change that.
Right.
And so, she'd pretty much tried everything that could be tried, prayed everything that could be prayed, gone through all kinds of deliverance and stuff. And A, nothing had worked, and B, a lot of people judged her faith because nothing had worked. And
right,
so
exactly.
She must be doing something wrong.
Right.
She must not really have faith that God would leave her like that and leave her hurting like that. And so she was totally open about this experience and how painful it was. But at the same time, she was equally confident. And again, she didn't say this, but she just communicated it in, sort of indirectly in the things she did say, that Jesus was worth it. And, that this was hard, but that Jesus was better. At the time in my sort of arrogant, freshman, sophomore, secular atheist mindset, I kind of thought that, she should envy me. Right. Because, maybe my life wasn't particularly rocking at the moment, but, at least I had my freedom, it was going to get better. I was going to, live my, my best gay life. And, I thought she should envy me, but she didn't envy me. She didn't, in a sense, I think she probably actually pitied me or felt sorry for me. And not that she would rub that in or ever say that in an obnoxious way, but I just got the sense that, if I had gayness and she had Jesus, that she thought she had the better end. If I had the freedom to be gay and she had Jesus, she felt that she had the better end of the deal.
Wow.
And that just spoke to me. It was sort of like the parable about the man who finds a treasure in a field and then, sells all that he has to buy it. If you're the random neighbor looking on and you see some guy buying this, barren lot and spending a fortune for it, you're like, wow, there must be something in there. And so that really, her example, and I love that because it's encouraging, because I'm often a person who doesn't have it all together and, who has suffered and who does suffer. And, her example is just so encouraging because it reminds me that at my best, we can point people to Jesus in the midst of things that hurt, in the midst of things that are hard. So I think, those were the two relationships that really brought me to the point of thinking seriously about Christianity. Sorry, I'm going to try to condense a little. Sorry, I sort of gone astray.
No, you have not. This is fantastic.
Okay.
How did so these conversations open you up to the possibility that there may be something here?
Yes.
But at the same time, you're still at home. You're still terribly depressed.
Yep.
When did you get back to school? And then what was that like now, with kind of an openness
right
to things maybe you hadn't been open to before?
Right. That's right. So this actually continued. So these relationships were actually more formed after I'd gone back to school.
Oh, got it.
So yes, I took off the spring semester of my freshman year, and then came back in the fall.
Had you gotten treatment for the depression? Had you gone to counseling?
Yes, I was seeing a therapist. I was seeing a psychiatrist. I was on medication. So I was getting help, and things were stable. Things were better, as is typical. I think this is true of colleges in general, but it's certainly true of Ivy League colleges that care about their reputation. They do not let you, if you withdraw for depression reasons or potential suicidality reasons, they don't let you come back unless they're convinced you've got all your ducks in a row, because they're worried about, understandably they're worried about reputation, liability, stuff like that. So yes, I was in a much better place. I had been getting therapy for the first time in my life, getting on medication, which I actually found very helpful. So I was sort of in a place where I was stable, but yes, I was in a place where I was having these conversations with Christians, thinking about spiritual, intrigued by these sort of, the idea that Christianity had been something different than I thought it was, that Jesus, that God was something different than I'd thought he was, or someone different than I'd thought he was.
Now, how were you? I'm sorry to interrupt you in that. But how were you squaring that then with what was happening sexually? Because the only messages you'd ever received were that God's angry and God, you're an abomination or whatever it is. How was that beginning to come together for you?
Right. So from the time I began to consider Christianity seriously, I'd always known affirming Christians. That was out there. Part of my arguing, when I first started arguing with people on the family values forums, I would sometimes try to try these arguments. Well, the Bible doesn't really condemn homosexuality. They never found that particularly compelling, and I eventually decided that I didn't either. But I was aware there was a possibility, and I knew affirming Christians. I knew Justin Lee, who would go on to found the Gay Christian Network.
Absolutely.
Back then. So before he was Justin Lee. So I was, I'm not one of these people who, and I feel like affirming folks often imagine like, oh, you're just not affirming because you didn't realize it's a possibility. I knew it was a possibility. I was aware of it. But I remember as I thought about it, as I read their arguments and, their sort of point of view, I remember thinking, wow, I sure am glad I'm not a Christian, because if I was a Christian, I don't think I could believe this.
Wow.
No, that's where I was I don't think I could with integrity, and I'm not saying this judgmentally of anyone else, but,
no, I understand.
Given other things I believe and the sort of the hermeneutical lenses I have, I was like, man, I do not think I would be able to go there and do that in good conscience. So
and you weren't even a follower of Jesus at this point.
No, I was not. No, I was just, but this definitely entered into my calculations.
No,
am
that's
I going to
fascinating.
follow Jesus or not? Because I was aware of the possibility that this was going to mess up my life.
Yes.
At least as I understood it, right? At
of
the
course.
Time, certainly mess up my life as I understood it. But at the same time, I had these examples of, like these two relationships I talk about, these people who, yes, it was hard, but it also seemed like they were pretty convinced that Jesus was worth it. And, they did not seem like lifeless people or they seemed to have in their own way, like it wasn't the life I'd envisioned for myself, but they seemed to have good, rich lives. They had friendships that meant a lot to them. They had a relationship with God that meant a lot to them. They were excited and passionate people. And so, so I would say, I was definitely aware that this might pose some challenges for my sexuality.
My goodness.
But having those examples sort of opened my mind to possibilities that I think I wouldn't have conceived otherwise, if that makes sense.
Of course. Absolutely it does. When did the Jesus thing become real and kind of formal, if that's the right word for you? When did you stop kind of exploring and go, okay, I think I'm into this?
Okay. Yeah. So, I'm attracted to God, I'm attracted, as portrayed in the scriptures. I'm attracted to Jesus and my friends, in these relationships, and what he seems to do for people. I was really, one of the things that really impressed me is how Christians react to being told they're weak. Right? You tell a regular person they're weak, they're like, no. You tell a Christian they're weak. If they're a real Christian, they're like, well, yeah. No, I think it's true.
That's right.
And then
absolutely.
Me, and that made a huge impression upon me at the time, that I think with faith and with genuine faith and with the grace of Jesus, there's a way in which we can be free from sort of pride and ego and this inability to acknowledge our weaknesses and failures and sins and need for forgiveness. And so, that was just another way in which, not, and I'm going to say not all Christians, but certainly some Christians were impressing me. And I was like, there's this Buddhist story. Sorry, I spent a lot of time studying Buddhism before I became a Christian. So I often think in those idioms, but there's a Buddhist story about, there's some guys are walking around and, they see a monk or an ascetic or something, and they're really impressed by him, and they want to know who his master is. And so this, that's sort of what I was feeling is, I see these people and I want to know who their master is. I want to know I want to know their master. So this is all, I'm being drawn to faith in all these ways, but I'm also at the same time pushing against it.
Of course.
Because I fear it's going to ruin my life as a gay woman. And it seems silly, right? After fighting so hard through bullying and depression, to make it to queer independence, And, just when being gay starts to get good, I'm going to flush that all away. Like,
were you dating? Were you dating during this?
Not at this time. I had initially, but sort of after the depression and all that, I was, I don't know if it was the antidepressants or whatever, but I wasn't particularly, yeah. So then that also sort of makes it easier that at the moment I wasn't dating.
Got it.
I was most actively considering Christian.
Got it.
That would have added a whole other dynamic in there.
Yes, it would have.
but so there was just a sense of, and I say this now as a Calvinist, but there was a sense of pursuit. There was a sense of, God, not only seemed increasingly interesting, but increasingly real. I would start marshaling objections to Christianity, like I'm going to defend myself against him because I felt like he was like coming to get me. So I'd line up, all these reasons why I couldn't become a Christian. So starting off with, the Bible's wrong on homosexuality, the Bible's wrong on women, the Bible's wrong on hell, and go on, and down like the little stuff at the end, like, what's up with the two different genealogies of Jesus, or, all these reasons, right? That I actually wrote them all out and like, here's why I can't be a Christian. And you're like,
that's awesome.
This is gonna keep me safe. And I also decide I start reading all this, atheist freethinker literature, because it's going to bolster my because I'm nervous, right? I've never been, religious in my life, and then I'm starting to sound like these weirdos and think like these weirdos.
Now, are you still at Princeton when this is all happening?
I am still at Princeton. This all takes place at Princeton. I convert in the summer between my sophomore and junior year. So I was probably home on summer break, but I'm, at Princeton, very much in that community. And and that's part of it too, right? I'm someone who takes pride in her intellect,
absolutely,
and her rationality, and I'm like, oh no, like what's becoming of me? So I'm trying to bolster my atheism, and these arguments that I've, so I'm reading these, like the last two books I read before I became a Christian. Well, one is a magazine. I read a copy of Free Inquiry magazine, sort of like a secular atheist magazine, and I read Ty Nielsen's Ethics Without God.
Yes,
and those are the two things I read before I become a Christian, right? Because I'm desperately, but I read these things, and all I can see are the holes in the arguments. All I can, it all seems flimsy. It all seems weak. I was watching a religious roundtable, where they had, sort of multi-faith, I think they had Christians and Jews and Muslims, and then they have an atheist guy over here. And every time the atheist, and this I think was on public television, and every time the atheist guy opens his mouth, I'm like yelling at him, because I'm like, no, you're misunderstanding them, you're misrepresenting them, you don't really understand what they're saying. And and I'm watching this with an atheist friend, and he's like completely, what is wrong with you?
You've left us.
Yeah, or he's like, and then I'm like, at some point I'm telling him how stressed this friend, we're talking about this, and I tell him how stressed out I am, that I feel like, there's this God, and I feel like he's gonna, on the one hand I'm interested, and on the other hand I feel like he's going to ruin my life. I don't know what to do with this. And he says, well, why don't you just pick a different God? And I say, and I shout out in response, I don't think I'm the one doing the picking. And that's how, obviously as being Reformed now, I sort of look back to that and I said, yes. But that was how even without that lens at the time, that is how it was. That's how intense it was. This God is after me, and I'm intrigued. He's appealing, but I'm scared.
No question.
So that's what's going on there. And then that was sort of the snapping point. I would say all those objections to Christianity I'd written down and lined up like ducks in a row. I don't think they were answered. I don't think they disappeared, or I received, sort of justifications for any of them. But it seemed to me that they didn't matter in the same way. They seemed small and insignificant, right? So before it was like, okay, this is why I can't become a Christian. But then it switched to like, okay, if the living God of love is calling to me to himself, inviting me into relationship with himself, drawing near to me, maybe I should respond to that and, we'll work out these disagreements and, confusions later. Right. And so, and that was, I think, the sort of the mental shift that took place. And that's, I think, what sort of crossed me over. I think the next morning I knelt down and, prayed a very profanity-laden version of the sinner's prayer. And,
awesome.
Acknowledged Jesus as my, because I was pretty stressed out, and, acknowledged, Jesus is my Lord and Savior. And
holy crap.
gave myself to him. So that is how I became a Christian.
And so now you're Christian and you're gay.
I'm Christian and I'm gay.
And this was kind of in the height, or I don't know if it was the height of, but it was certainly the beginnings of the ex-gay movement, which is the idea, of course, that you can, as Jesus follower, kind of have your orientation transformed. And so was that, so where did you gravitate now? So you've heard the progressive Christian stuff. You've heard the non-Christian stuff. You've heard the conservative Christian stuff.
Right.
That had to be a very confusing season.
Yes.
To try to wrestle with, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah. So, the ex-gay thing was definitely out there. And I knew a lot, like from my participation in this dialogue, I knew lots of the leaders at Exodus International, leaders of Exodus. So I was actually sort of connected to that, and that definitely informed my thinking at first. On the one hand, I think it helped that I was in conversation with a lot of those people directly, because when you actually talked to, I think it was sort of misunderstood in the church as, everybody's just healed, everybody's just transformed if they want to be. But when you actually talked to, ex-gays or same-sex attracted Christians themselves, there was often a lot more realism, acknowledgement of ongoing struggle.
No, absolutely.
We thought, I think
hey, we only let people struggle in the past.
Right.
Okay. We don't encourage people to struggle last night.
Right. So, so I would say, I think I was hopeful that I would change. I read the books that I thought would help me in that regard. I got informal counseling from an Exodus leader for a time. When I went to grad school, I would attend an Exodus ministry for a while. So
and grad school's MIT, getting your PhD. Just to be clear.
Right. There we go.
I just want to throw out that, like, when you talk about being in love or fascinated by your intellect, there's a lot to be fascinated by. All right, that's all. Let me just want to throw that out there. All right. So now you're in grad school.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out this Jesus thing.
Yeah.
And you've got the ex-gay sort of ministry calling, right? Because that seems like that was the only. And again, please correct my misunderstanding, but it seems like that was the only sort of option at that point.
Yeah, I would say, there were different sort of positions within that. I don't think that was sort of a monolithic movement. Like I say, I mentioned my friend there who had never experienced any sort of change, in her orientation. But she still very much identified, with those people as part of that movement. So, yeah, that was how I framed it. And I think as time went on, I saw problems with that. I experienced, sort of frustrations with it. But
so again, so sorry to interrupt. But there's something in there I know that you get into later. Okay. Which is the goal of that ministry was orientation change, correct? That was what healing was defined as. Is that true?
I think that was the ideal. I think there was another sense in which healing was, I think particularly as the years went on with Exodus, and this sort of happened while I was there was a shift from increasing emphasis on identity, right? That healing was, you're not going to identify as gay anymore, or it's, and so that was, I think the unsuspecting straight person, that sounds like, the same thing, right? You're not gay anymore.
It does. Yeah.
But the actual reality was, no, okay, you still might have these feelings, but you had to, I don't know, sort of
not be defined by them.
Yeah, whatever that means. Which
right.
That language, but yes.
Oh, we'll get to that.
But yeah. So that was So yes, that was the framework I worked through. I will say I was very grateful to have other influences in my life. There's the woman who discipled me in college. She was associated with the Princeton Evangelical Fellowship. She was the wife of the director of that fellowship. And she started out meeting with me to talk about the Bible once a week. But then, as I went through bouts of depression and other stuff, we developed a closer relationship, sort of a mentorship. And it was sort of helpful. She was straight. She had nothing to, had no idea about any of this ex-gay stuff. I think she thought, I should change, and that would be nice if I changed. But she wasn't focused on that. And so I think it definitely helped me to have this sort of regular Christian voice for, regular Christian discipleship, regular Christian sanctification, sort of grounding me in just sort of a broader sense of what it is to follow Jesus, rather than, I think for some people you can just get so ensconced in that ex-gay world. And so that following Jesus is reduced to, trying to seek healing or, trying to abstain. Yep. And that, that's the only source of information you have. So I was certainly grateful, from her and then from others, to have other people speaking in and broadening my view of discipleship, sanctification, what it means to follow Jesus, what it means to be faithful, in a way that I think eventually would help me sort of move beyond the ex-gay sort of mold, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely it does. So pushing forward a bit, you're still attracted to women.
Yes.
Find Jesus compelling. And what are you thinking about your future? Because what I want to get to is the fact that your bio says you're married to Tim and have 2 kids.
Right.
And so there's a WTF moment coming.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
So let's visit that one for a second, because that hasn't changed, correct? I mean, based on things I've heard you say, right? You're still overwhelmingly attracted to women.
Yes.
And yet you have a flourishing family.
Yes.
So kind of lead us through that.
Okay.
The decision to once the ex-gay movement, okay, there are holes here. That's not going to be everything it's saying it's going to be.
Right.
And I'm still a Jesus follower, and you have permission from both culture and progressive Christians to not have to wrestle through that. Yeah, you could just run with it.
Yeah.
What was it that kept you kind of filtering back to celibacy and then marrying some dude?
Right. Well, so the first thing is actually in the beginning, there is a lot of back and forth in my heart, in my mind.
I would imagine.
There's a lot of inner debate and wrestling. What do I believe about this? Can God be good if he's calling me to this?
Right.
There's a lot of turmoil. There's a time when every day I wake up and it's like, am I going to follow Jesus today or not? It really got to that point of a daily decision. And I'm not saying that's good. I think we should have more stability than that. But that was where I was at the time.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a point at which I decide, I can't. Sorry. There's a point at which I debating theology, right? I'm reading all the affirming theology I can get my hands on because I'm desperate to convince myself.
Of course.
And at one point I get to the point where I'm like, and I think I'm almost there, right? I'm like, God, here I am. This doesn't make sense, right? This doesn't intuitively make sense to me why you would ask this of me. And I think you want me to use my mind and, be rational. And so, I'm not going to do this until it's explained to me and until it makes sense. And I say this, and this lasts for about 15 minutes because I realize, okay, yeah, I don't understand that. I don't understand why God is forbidding me to express my sexuality in that way. But, here's something else I don't understand, the gospel, and it's like, the God of heaven and earth, right, is going to come down and become a man, and die on a cross, right? To rescue me from sin and the devil, and to, reconcile me to himself. So, we can, live together eternally. I'm like, but, that doesn't make sense either. So I'm like, okay, if I'm going to believe, but I like believing that, right? I like the gospel. It's nice. It's encouraging. So it's like, if I'm going to believe God and in the Bible where he says what I would like him to say, even though it doesn't necessarily make sense, then if I'm being consistent, then I've got to believe.
Oh man,
it doesn't make sense.
Oh man,
and that was hard, but I couldn't shake that. There were times I faltered. There were times I, was sort of living a double life. Had a foot in both worlds.
Of course,
got involved in a relationship, but. Even there, it was sort of like this hot and cold, tumultuous thing for me. I couldn't have peace. I just, and I see, and I know they're affirming people, and, I'd envy them. Right? Wow, how do they do it? But I could not make it work. And so, I eventually came to a place where I realized I had to just sort of commit myself wholeheartedly to following God, and that, doing this half and half sort of thing wasn't going to work. So I moved away from the ex-gay mindset and just became focused on becoming a serious disciple of Jesus, working on my spiritual disciplines, becoming a person who prays, becoming a person, Siri's interrupting me. Becoming a person who...
She's recording everything.
What? Becoming a person who, reads God's word, becoming a person who memorizes scripture and is fed by that throughout the day. She calls it to mind. Becoming a person who serves. One thing that I didn't talk about, or don't have time to get into, is, but I'm sure it's obvious to most people, I was initially very alienated from Christians. I did not feel comfortable around them. I looked pretty dykey for, most of my early years as a Christian. And so, but I came to a point, as I'm pursuing this more wholehearted discipleship, is that, no, wait, this is my family. I have to be committed to these people. I become more involved in my grad student fellowship. I'm co-teaching an Alpha course.
Oh my goodness.
I'm co-leading a Bible study. I'm spending all this time, building family and experiencing family with other believers. And, gradually over time, this is taking on a more dominant place in my life than the ex-gay mindset. And I realized that, as I do this, it's hard, there's challenges, but I'm also thriving. I feel myself growing as a Christian. I'm growing in connection to others. I'm growing in my ability to love others, and I'm having fun. I'm having a good time. And so I decide, wait, and I think that was sort of the end of the endless, struggle back and forth. And, what I would say is a place of contentment with celibacy. And so I like to emphasize that I think God had me work that out and come to a place of contentment, before I moved on to the next thing.
Right.
So that's
and
what
the next thing. The next thing was a dude.
The next thing was a dude, and I know, right. And we were friends. He was part of this Christian fellowship I was part of, and all of a sudden, and I'd known him for years, and I'd never thought much about him one way or the other, but I mean, honestly, right? But there came a point, and I didn't know this at the time, but unbeknownst to me, he was asking God to give me to him for a wife.
What?
Yeah. So he told a friend, I think I kind of want to date Johanna. And a mutual friend knows both of us. And he's like, I think if you want to date Johanna, you're going to have to wait a really long time. But I didn't know this at the time. But so we start talking, and at first it starts out, I just find what he says as being interesting. And then I find myself.
That's how it starts.
And then I'm in church, and if I'm in church before him, I'm like, when is he going to show up? Is he going to sit by me? If I'm at a party, I'm like, is he there or not? So we talk, and we totally lose track of time. There was a time at his, I went over to his apartment, and I'm leaving, And I think my watch must be upside down because it feels like it's 10 o'clock, but it's actually 4:30 in the morning. So I mean, that's how, when we spent time together, it was sort of like electric. And so none of this was explicitly sexual.
Right.
But it was romantic, it was falling in love. It was delight. It was interest. And so I told him this. I said, look, I actually barged into his apartment one morning and I said, look, I know you're leaving town. You've accepted this job out in Dayton. I know I told you I was a lesbian and I still am, but, I've never felt anything for a guy before and I have no idea how you feel about me, but I just thought I should tell you.
Wow.
So, yeah. And so with that, we started dating.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah. And that was sort of, I was excited, but as things move more serious and we start talking about marriage, I was like, oh man, this could go badly. Because, I knew, from being so familiar with so much of the ex-gay movement, I knew lots of horror stories, or maybe not horror stories, but really hard stories. So for a while I tried to scare him off. I'm like, no, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. This is never going to work out. For all we know, this is just a phase I'm going through. But we get to, he's committed and he's interested and he's like, no, I think we can work it out. And I come to a point when I realize, you know what, I'm never going to know for sure where my feelings are going to be at. I can't know for sure that this is just going to be a phase and that is going to last. But I come to a point where I realize that while I don't know what the future holds, that I want to spend the rest of my life with him. And I don't know exactly what that will look like, but that I want to share my life with him. I want to do life with him. I want to have a family with him. Yeah. And so that, we talked about it and that's, we got married.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And there's so much to explore there.
Yeah. So sorry. Yeah.
No, sorry at all. I'm the one egging you on. This is, because, and the reason I wanted to spend, time on your story is because it informs then how you respond to people who, because you're now part of the spiritual friendship movement, the Revoice conference. We've had Nate on before. Yeah. And the not so shocking part is the criticism. Obviously, I can see the progressive criticism going, dude, you guys are suffering. What kind of idiots are you? But it's the conservative criticism that seems so interesting. To me, and not interesting in a good way. And so let's transition a little bit.
Yep.
Explain for people who are not familiar with the spiritual friendship sort of movement. What is it? What's it about? What's it emphasize? How did the Revoice conference sort of come out of that? And I'm assuming you're speaking there again this year. I'm currently looks like I'm going to be speaking for Spiritual Friendship and Revoice this year, so that'll be pretty. So are those two separate organizations, or because yes, there's two. So Spiritual Friendship is the older organization. It started out as just sort of a private conversation between the folks that were thinking a lot about these issues. And then that eventually turned into a public blog founded by Wesley Hill and Ron Balgau. And, I think Wes's first book, Washed and Waiting, is the absolute best book on this subject, which, so just... until you write yours. No, never, not even. I mean, not that I'll never write a book, but it won't be that good. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So spiritual friendship. Spiritual friendship is just, it's basically focusing on the reality that for most, not focusing on the reality, but it takes for granted two things, right? That, we believe that the Bible does not sanction or does not permit same-sex relationships or same-sex marriage, or, same-sex sexual relationships or same-sex marriage, but also, the ex-gay approach, for most people, it's not just going to go away. And for some people, marriage
may not be the wisest course.
Opposite sex marriage.
Right. Opposite sex marriage may not be the wisest course, particularly if it doesn't go away. And so I think, and I haven't gotten Ron to sign off on this or anything, but I would think the point is that the main focus is that it's worth, for those as for all of us, but especially for those same-sex attracted people who aren't going to marry, it's still not good for them to be alone. And we need to recover the significance of friendship as a Christian community, particularly. We need to encourage, deeper friendship, deeper kinds of relationship outside of the marriage relationship. And we need to encourage, just different ways of being spiritual family to each other, different ways of being present in each other's lives. And for those of us who are same-sex attracted, and by almost inevitably, our relationships, our friendships with people of the same sex are going to be a little complicated, at least on our end. Not all the time, but often enough. We have to learn how to purify that, or think about how to purify that. How to cling to what is pure and holy and good and life-giving in our friendships, and how to get rid of what is carnal, what is fleshly, what's pulling us down, what's pulling us away from Jesus. I think a lot of conservative critics are like, fleeing immorality here means that if you're gay, you probably shouldn't have a same-sex friend. Or a friend of faith. But
that's the Mike Pence rule,
right? But I
homosexual
think people who aren't thinking carefully are just going to apply that. Like that's, I've heard people say that, and they assume that every time we talk about friendship, we're just trying to, make an excuse, for the flesh, or just trying to gratify. We're calling it friendship, but we're trying to gratify our desires in some way. But no, it's just an acknowledgement is, we can't live alone, or we shouldn't. That loneliness is a problem. It's a problem for other people, but it's a huge problem for gay Christians. And so we've got to, if everybody shouldn't get married, and maybe they shouldn't, then we need to find other ways of dealing with that. And and it's going to be complicated to navigate that if you're a same-sex attracted Christian and you need help. That's not a reason to not navigate it and just run the other way, but it is a reason to be sort of mindful and prayerful in how you navigate that. And that resources like spiritual friendship could be valuable for that.
So some of the criticisms I find, I've heard anyway, are you shouldn't use gay language, right? The word gay doesn't apply, or you shouldn't use it, or there's like other Christian-y words, same-sex attracted is one I've thrown out, or and kind of what's your take on that?
So when I was very more influenced by the ex-gay movement, I followed that line myself. But I've sort of come to a place where I think it's a matter of personal, where are your personal struggles? What's your personal trajectory? I think for someone who is feeling, having a hard time letting their past life, their old life go, I think it can be helpful for them for a season to use language that sort of distances themselves from that, sort of. But I think a lot of Christians are in a different place, and we're, particularly those who are raised in the church, are in a place of their big struggle is needing to acknowledge their reality, right? And accept it in some sense as reality, as something that's going on in their lives, so they can deal with it. So I think, I don't like rules about language either way. I think same-sex attracted or some equivalent can be better for some people, but I also think plenty of faithful same-sex attracted, plenty of faithful gay believers, sorry, I'm mixing up the language here, would say, people who have a solid track record, right, of living purely following Jesus, not falling into sin, have said that they find gay language helpful in one way or another for in helping them deal with these issues. So, and the thing I always come back to is, and I talk about this in my pre-conference talk, is I realized that the first thing I said to myself when I came out to myself was, I am gay. Yeah, I'm 11 years old. I'm not talking about identity, right? I've never met another gay person. I'm not talking about my attachment to a gay community. I'm just saying that I like women. To me, that just sort of reveals that based on what we're at, the word can have different connotations to us and personal significance to us. But, these claims that the word inevitably has a sort of cultural significance or, sort of an identity significance. I don't think that makes sense. And, I don't think how the English word is actually used sort of supports that, if that makes sense.
It does, but the critics would say you use it in an identifying kind of way. So, and again, I mean, I don't buy this, so I'm setting this up so that you can, so that you're just swinging the bat of Princeton and MIT, but when they say, okay, but you use it in an identifying way. In other words, you call yourself a gay Christian, and it's a movement of gay Christians, and it's that language is used. So you're describing the kind of Christian you are by using the word gay. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to just say you're Christians who happen to be gay, or you're Christians who happen to be same-sex attracted? Why does gay Christian? Why is that moniker so important that you identify yourself that way?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but my own feeling is that
I'm looking.
We're not making a big. I mean, I'm not personally all that attached one way or the other to gay Christian as a moniker. I think to me it basically means the same thing as Christian who happens to be gay or Christian who happens to be same-sex attracted. So I just don't see why we're making a big deal out of this, one way or the other. I don't see, I don't actually go around, I'm a gay Christian, I'm a gay Christian, I'm a gay Christian. It seems like a short, succinct way to talk about, the people, a group of people who have both of these traits. But I don't actually see the gay sort of qualifying the Christian, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Right.
I agree with you.
Because of our cultural situation right now, the world and the church is kind of interested in this question, right? It's a point of controversy. It's something people talk about. And, either gay Christian or some other language to me, is just a convenient way of inserting myself into the conversation. Is, look,
right.
Here I've got a stake in both of these things. I have some experience with both of these things. Here's what I think.
Yes.
I think that I don't think we're the ones making a big deal out of gay Christian or like adhering to it, or I think it's the critics who are fixating on it more.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But I think they're claiming that you're making gayness a part of your identity. In ways that, and again, I'm quoting here.
Okay,
I'm quoting the thought of other people.
Right.
I don't walk around saying, "Hey, I'm a porn addicted Christian," right? So why would you make your sin? And again, I'm quoting. Why would you make your sin central to your identity, right? Because doesn't it say in 1 Corinthians 6, and that's what some of you were when it talks about So I'm trying to set you up to kick ass, Johanna, because you had this line in your talk that it was just the greatest thing I've ever heard. And so I'm like, oh, get there.
Sorry.
No. I know I'm being playful, but there's the sense in which, and the critique seems to be, why are you identifying as gay if you hold the traditional biblical view?
Right.
Why would you wrap that into part of your identity, and not, because what it seems like it's the same ex-gay trick now being done at a kind of different level. That
right.
So let's not call yourselves gay. Let's call yourselves something else.
Right.
And now you shouldn't identify as if you were something as gay. You should identify as something else.
Right.
Because it seems like using that language makes it okay that you're still gay.
Right. So,
does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I mean, what I would say, first of all, is, this is a part of my reality. This is a part of my ongoing experience. It's not like I don't notice, it's not like, both, it's shaped my past. It shapes my present. It'll probably shape my future. This is where, historically the rubber meets the road for me in terms of discipleship. This is where I've wrestled the most with God in terms of faith and surrender and trust, and all that good stuff. So there's a sense in which this experience, even though I don't see it as essential to who I am, I don't believe I'm going to be gay in heaven. But, there's a way in which this ongoing reality is important to me and continues to be important. And I think that's true, whether or not it's broken, whether or not it's fallen, whether or not it's sinful, this place of weakness has impact on my life. And if I'm going to live wisely, if I'm going to live well, if I'm going to make straight paths for my feet, I gotta be alert to that. I gotta be aware of that. So when people freak out about identity, at first I want to be like, well, what are you talking about? Whatever the Nashville Statement's terminology, right? Self-conception.
Yes.
There are ways in which this figure, particularly as a Christian, there are ways in which this figures into my self-understanding, not in some ultimate ontological sense, but, as a fallen, fleshly, very much in process disciple of Jesus, it's part of the equation. It's part of who I am right now in some sense. And we can dress it up with all this, this fancy talk about ontology and who I really am and who I really am in Christ. But ultimately, I feel like this is about, can I talk about my experience right now? Can other believers, particularly those who are in a lot more need than I am of being able to talk and having somebody to talk to, can they speak about their experience without constantly, getting people in their face for the identity front? I mean, I do think there's a dangerous kind of identity. I do think there are people, particularly affirming people, who, will say, who will say things like, no, this being gay, defines what is good for me. It defines how I'm meant to live, who I'm supposed to be, who God wants, God created me to be this way, and this is how God wants me to live. This is who God wants me to be. From where I stand, I think that's a problematic. I think that's I think that's a problematic kind of identity. I think it undermines people's obedience, and I think it directs them away from what God wants them to do. But the Christians that the critics are going after, the spiritual friendship Christians, the Revoice Christians, but that's not what's going on here. None of these people are affirming. None of these people are just trying to justify compromise or disobedience, or what I understand as compromise or disobedience to God, or affirmation of same-sex marriage or sexuality. There's, that I don't see how you can accuse someone of identifying with this sinful identity if they are, if they're basically putting it to death, if they're choosing against it, if they're laying it down and saying, what, I feel these things, I long for these things, but Jesus is more important. Jesus is calling the shots in my life. I don't think it makes any sense to harp on the identity point with people who are following Jesus and denying themselves in this way.
Yes. That's the jackhammer point. No, I mean, seriously, here's what you said in the talk. And I shouted because it just blew my mind. If you're living and you have a transcript of this thing, and I will refer in the notes to the talk. If you're living in obedience to biblical teaching, abstaining from the sexual and or romantic relationships you most desire, there is no serious debate to be had over which is more central to who you are, your faith or your sexuality. And I was going, my Lord. But so I'm just quoting you back to yourself saying, great job. You really said that great. But then there seems on the progressive side of things, right? Hearing you talk and answer some of the conservative concerns, there's a progressive concern that's just like, but look at the bad fruit of your theology, Johanna. I mean, you yourself have experienced depression and isolation and being pushed away and the shame. I mean, right? We can't get in touch with what your experience has been like for those of us who haven't walked that road.
Right.
So how can you promote this when the fruit of that teaching is so nasty?
So the key thing I want to say to that, and this is part of why I think Revoice particularly is so important, is that yes, I think there has been a lot of suffering, a lot of unhappiness. I think a lot of it doesn't have to be that way. I think there are ways in which gay Christians can, seeking to be faithful to a traditional sexual ethic, can make things better for themselves. And I think there are ways in which the church, in a greater emphasis on community, on spiritual family, on creating ways for us to be present in each other's lives, other than marriage and nuclear family, could make a huge difference. So yes, I see suffering. I believe that a lot of the suffering doesn't have to be that way. And to be honest, a lot of the suffering, I think, comes from discouragement from the church. It's not the inherent theology itself. It's, being relentlessly misunderstood, or, having people draw back from you, or, be alienated from you, having people reject you because they don't like exactly what you say, or, policing your language because they don't quite understand, why you did that thing or why you said that thing. So, yeah, I want to say that I do think, there is some suffering and difficulty. I think denying yourself sexually and relationally is a stressor. I think, it's not an,
you think?
It's not an easy thing, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
So, but I don't think everything that's a stressor should automatically be thrown out of our lives, right?
Yes, and because that gets to your theology of sanctification, right?
Right.
That the goal of sanctification isn't to remove all pain and discomfort. Right. Go a bit into that, because you hit it a bit in the talk. Right.
Well, can I just sort of finish up the last thing?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I just want to say that I think some of the suffering doesn't have to be that way. So I think I would say, when I would answer to a progressive Christian, is that I think when there is quote unquote bad fruit, people have been doing it wrong. The church has been doing it wrong. The culture, the community has been doing it wrong. So I think there's a lot of the suffering can be avoided or mitigated. And I think even if it can't be, I think the hard stuff, I think the church could do a much better job of bearing our burdens, coming alongside of us, helping us to have a more hopeful, a perspective that sees what God is doing through this and how he's using it. I think there's a lot of mess out there right now. And that's why I think Revoice is so urgent. And it's really important that we have these conversations because, the world sees it. The world sees the pain. The world sees the mess. Particularly the progressive Christians see the mess. Christians who aren't sure, right? Christians who are on the fence.
Oh my goodness.
They're like, wow, this is really hard. I heard a friend the other day just tell me that, she thinks someone in her life is becoming side A side A is a language we use. Becoming affirming because she's having a hard time. So as uncomfortable it is, we need to look at this and face it head on. But I want to say that a lot of it doesn't have to be that way. And what does have to be that way, we can bear it together, as what I believe God desires for us is to bear this together as a church, in unity and spiritual family, as brothers and sisters in Christ, lifting each other up, carrying each other, and not just gay Christians taking care of each other, but the rest of the church coming in on it too. And I think, and that's what I hope for, and that's what I pray for, and I think that's the way forward, and that's the hope that I have.
Oh, Johanna, boy, thank you. Holy moly, this is such good stuff. I mean, we've been going an hour and 20 minutes.
Sorry.
And no, don't you dare apologize. I feel like there's still, so many questions I'd love to ask you, but for the sake of our audience, we'll officially wrap up, although I'd love for you to stay on the line for just a second.
Okay.
So friends, you can find out much more on the Revoice website. Johanna has her own website, right? Which is
JohannaFinnegan.com.
Right. So that's Johanna. Finnegan is fine again.
Yeah. Finegan.
And so thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you for this. This is such great stuff.
You're welcome.